I'm Teisha Bader in for Mark Golub. And in the news, reports this weekend that a number of Jewish participants in a gay pride parade in Chicago were told to leave the parade because they were holding pride flags with the Star of David on them, being told that the flags and symbol made others feel unsafe. Jewish organizations have condemned the incident and are urging the organizers of the march to apologize. The American Jewish Committee's Chicago director, Amy Stoken, called the incident despicable. She joins me now over the phone from Chicago to talk more about this story. Thank you so much, Amy, for joining us here on JBS.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So I've read a number of reports from the weekend. The first report, I believe, was from the Windy City Times, which had the original story. What is your understanding of what actually happened at the march this weekend?
So I'm glad you asked that way because I actually wasn't there myself. So I also only know what I've heard and what I've read.
Okay.
But what I understand is the same, that there were a number of women who showed up to march that have done so previously without incident and came with their flag, which was the gay pride flag with the Star of David, and they were told to leave, and they were subsequently harassed as well.
Right. Now, the AJC released a statement saying that they were appalled by this incident. I'll just quote you in the response. You said, "In the heart of our city, one of the most blatant incidents of anti-Semitism took place today at the Dyke March. Where is the collective outrage over this despicable targeting of Jews?" Now, before we go further, we should just differentiate. The Dyke March was a separate march from the main gay pride parade march that took place over the weekend in Chicago. So there were two marches, or maybe more than two, but they were not connected to the main gay pride march. Is that correct?
Right, that's what I understand. Actually, that this was on Saturday with the main march being on Sunday.
Okay. Now, other Jewish groups have come out and responded. In addition to the AJC, the Anti-Defamation League said today that the organizers should apologize, calling the incident outrageous. Jonathan Greenblatt, I'll quote, who is the CEO, said the community of LGBTQ supporters is diverse, and that is part of its tremendous strength. He said both the act and the explanation were anti-Semitic, plain and simple. And then he cites the group that one of the participants who was asked to leave was said to be the manager of this organization called A Wider Bridge. And he mentions them, saying that he joins them in demanding an apology, adding, "We appreciate the Human Rights Campaign support, and we call on other leaders from the LGBTQ community to condemn this exclusion." So how do you explain this group that is obviously promoting rights for all, singling out Jews in this incident, and really taking that symbol and making accusations?
Right. So I would agree with all of the other comments that you made, and I would add that this wasn't an Israeli flag. This was a Star of David on a gay pride flag. So I would start by saying that even if this was about Israel somehow, that we would firmly disagree with any position that Israel should have been the topic here. And it's worth noting that Israel is actually the one country in the Middle East where gay rights exist, where same-sex marriages are recognized, where same-sex couples can adopt children. So when you talk about being inclusive and to say that because they represented Israel, that they were no longer welcome because at a pride parade is just so mind-boggling. But this, as you mentioned, goes beyond Israel because this wasn't an Israeli flag. And so now you are saying that if you are Jewish and you either are part of the LGBTQ community or you're a sympathizer with it, you're not welcome. And that is the opposite of being inclusive, and it's also anti-Semitic. Because you're saying regardless of your position on Israel, if you are here and you are proudly showing that you are also Jewish, you are not welcome at this march. I think that's a dangerous message, and I think that it's, as some of the other quotes you were saying, and as I said, this is blatant anti-Semitism.
Absolutely, Amy. In Israel, they just had a number of gay pride parades, huge turnouts. And really, I mean, I've lived in Israel for many years. There's a great support for the LGBTQ community. Obviously, there are always going to be those people that demonstrate against, and, you know, there are always those smaller groups. But in general, it is a very inclusive society for all. And you make a really good point about if Israel was a target in this situation, it is completely misdirected. Laurel Grauer, who is from a Wider Bridge, she was one of the participants asked to leave, and the Windy City Times spoke with her. And she is the one who said that she was also publicly harassed, and she said that she was being told to leave. She says, because my flag was a trigger to people that they found offensive. And again, as you mentioned, she says she's marched with the flag before. She's never been harassed before this incident over the weekend. And apparently she was told by other members of at the march that they were pro-Palestinian and they're anti-Zionist and, you know, all these things that apparently they got into a conversation with her, which I don't even understand why she was asked questions, you know, about why are you carrying that flag? What is your affiliation? What is your association? That in itself is a bit disturbing. So
Lori's experience, again, I wasn't there myself, but yes, and on the flags, my understanding is I didn't see them, but I saw a picture where they were waving flags of Afghanistan and Libya, again, where one may be executed for being gay, and also Egypt and Lebanon, whereas Lori was told to leave because of the flag she was carrying with the Star of David, telling that she would be causing people to feel unsafe. And then if I could just add one more thing about, again, people have different opinions on Israeli policy, but that as far as I know, at any given time, there are going to be thousands of Palestinians from the territories living in Tel Aviv to avoid persecution, including from their own families. So I think Israel can be held out as really, again, as you said, not necessarily perfect and has its own issues that it's confronting in the gay rights world, but the fact that this is a place of reprieve to avoid persecution in the Middle East, and that Lori would be told to leave because her Star of David was making people feel unsafe, again, is just taking reality and twisting it on its head. But again, I didn't see exactly what happened to Lori. AJC has spoken with her. We support a Wider Bridges call for an apology. We also support discussion and education and dialogue. And I would say that's another thing that's really troubling about this, is that, again, the LGBTQ march is not the appropriate place to be hashing out feelings on Israel or discussing Israeli policy. But this really could have been a time for Jews and Muslims to come together on a common cause. Think how meaningful that would be. That's one big effort that AJC is focusing on right now, is we have a new Muslim-Jewish Advisory Council and working on members of the Jewish community and members of the Muslim community finding that common ground where they can advocate together. And this could have been a good example of that, and instead this just turned into a win for hate and saying we're going to exclude people based on not just how you feel about Israel, but on being Jewish.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the Muslim Jewish Advisory Council, Amy. We've mentioned the council several times in our daily newscast that we do, and I want to speak more about some of the programs that you have through the council. I just want to get back to the Dyke March did post a statement that was cited in the article in the Windy City Times, and this is just part of it. It says that their decision was made after the Jewish participants, referring to them, repeatedly expressed support for Zionism during conversations with Chicago Dyke March Collective members. They said, we have since learned that at least one of these individuals is a regional director, and they mentioned for a Wider Bridge, and they claim that it has right-wing interests and that the group is provocative in their statements and in the ideals that they hold. And again, then they start grouping their opinions about Palestinian human rights and accusations against Israel somehow with this LGBTQ march. They go on to say the March Collective is explicitly not anti-Semitic, we are anti-Zionist. So this,
right.
Of course, in and of itself is disturbing. They say the liberation of Palestine and all oppressed people everywhere is what they support. And of course they say we welcome Jewish volunteers that are anti-Zionist as well. They say that at the end of their conversation, their statement. So it's also, I'm not sure where to be disturbed more about this incident and about their explanation.
Right, and this falls under a term called intersectionality, which gets thrown around quite a bit, where one cause is merging with another cause under the principle that both are suffering oppression. And here, I would say it's almost hijacked the cause of LGBTQ pride and advancement by turning it into a dialogue about Israel. There was no place for that here. And again, I can't speak for Lori, but she was there with her pride flag, with the Star of David, like she's done previously, to march alongside the other women in that march. She wasn't there to get into a dialogue about the Israeli government. And I think the fact that she showed up and her flag was identified as a quote-unquote trigger just shows the anti-Israel and anti-Semitic sentiment that is now underlying the movement and targeting certain other movements, many of which Jewish people identify with, participate in, and then telling them, because you are Jewish, or maybe you're not Jewish but sympathize with Israel, or maybe you're not Jewish and you care about anti-Semitism, you are no longer welcome to participate in this cause. I think it's very dangerous, and we're seeing it more and more, and I think this was just a very blatant example of it.
Absolutely. Amy, have you had a chance to speak to the organizers of the march, or has AJC, reached out or heard anything from the Dyke March organizers after this was in the paper?
At this point, we haven't. Again, we stand with Lori. We stand with the wider bridge on this. We echo that we would like an apology, but we are also open to dialogue. We haven't directly, but I imagine that we will. And I think it will be a coordinated effort of Chicago's Jewish communities and LGBTQ organizations that don't support this type of activity. I think there will be many calls coming from organizations individually, coming to them together to say, we do want an apology, and we're also open to discussing this and other issues.
And I love how you're, in what you said before, really trying to take the positive out of this, saying, even though this was a really disturbing incident, it is an opportunity for discussion. It is an opportunity to say, okay, what could have been a different approach to this situation? How could there have been a dialogue? There are people who don't have all the facts about Israel, who don't have all the facts about rights of the LGBTQ community. Here's an opportunity to ask a question, to get an answer, to maybe learn something, as opposed to accusing somebody of something and immediately excluding them from a gathering that is supposed to be all about inclusion.
Right. If you're stopping somebody at the door because of a Star of David, you're not saying that you're inclusive, and you're not saying that you're welcoming dialogue. And that is a huge principle of AJC, is that we're going to build bridges. We're going to figure out ways to find common ground, and where we don't, we're going to have discussions about it. And this is completely antithetical to that.
So let's talk a bit about the new advisory council, the Muslim Jewish Advisory Council. Talk a little bit about what sort of the seeds of creating that council were.
So the Muslim Jewish Advisory Council is really about, and again, it's not about Israel, and it's not about we're just going to hash this out and fight about it. It's about seeing where do we have common ground. And right now, that's really domestic issues. We have seen both a rise in anti-Semitism, a rise in Muslim activity. And so we're able to say, you know what, we can come together on things, we can advocate together, we can speak out jointly on things that issue both of our communities, and let's do that right now. Because it makes such a difference, and the more you're building bridges and the more you're getting to know people, the more you're able to understand what they're all about and see them as human and understand their narratives and understand the things that you can say, you know what, maybe I understand this a little better now. And so we have this national council, and we're actually focusing right now on developing a regional council for the Midwest that will be modeled after our national council. And again, this is an opportunity to come together. And it may not be that we see eye to eye on everything, but we'll find the areas that we do. And that's, again, why I think this is just so disappointing, because everybody who was coming to that march yesterday had something in common that they wanted to speak out on, and they let other issues and they let anti-Semitism infiltrate that and really just ruin. It was just really a missed opportunity.
Absolutely, and it strikes me that, I mean, there were pride parades all across the country, and for the most part, they were they were a positive experience for people. They were an opportunity for people to come together, to feel kinship and inclusion, and to say something positive. So it's unfortunate that this happened. Again, it is just one incident, but on the other hand, it's important to address it because it was so disturbing, and it was so antithetical to really, just to Jewish values and to what goes on in Israel and in the Jewish world.
And I would just add one more thing that I think is worth noting, is that this very same weekend, the Turkish government banned the LGBTQ parade in its entirety, and then when some activists came out, they were actually shot with rubber bullets and with tear gas. And so contrast that to where there's pride parades in Israel, where the Israeli government is protecting the participants, and then to say what you said, here was an opportunity where people were coming together on common ground, and then some were told they were unable to stay, ostensibly because of their position on Israel, but even more so because they were just bearing a Star of David.
Yeah, and there is just so much misinformation or lack of information. People just read one thing and then they make assumptions and they make accusations and they don't know. And instead of asking a question or learning more about something, it just all gets grouped into, what's the word that you used, intersectionality?
Mm-hmm, intersectionality.
So when you as director of the AJC in Chicago, do you see this phenomenon in other ways sort of rearing its head? How do you come across this in your daily efforts there at the AJC?
We do see it. It's happening more and more, particularly on college campuses, too. And again, intersectionality in and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing. AJC cares very much about finding common ground, about advocating together, that we don't need to, AJC cares about anti-Semitism in the Jewish communities around the world, but we also care about human rights and democratic values. So there's oftentimes we're going to find partners that we're going to advocate with where we have common ground. But again, to take that and turn it on its head and say, therefore, we're going to exclude people who may care about one issue, either because they're a particular religion or they have a particular view on a different issue, again, is really antithetical to finding common ground, to finding where we can learn more about each other. It's just turning that on its head. So we're seeing more and more of this, particularly when it comes to Israel, and we're seeing the anti-Israel sentiment more and more veer into anti-Semitism. So, of course, there are people who can criticize the Israeli government, can criticize Israeli policy and not be anti-Semitic. But in examples like this, we're seeing more and more where it's become almost a politically correct way to be anti-Semitic. And to say, well, because we're anti-Zionist, we're going to treat Jews in this particular way, or we're going to exclude members of the Jewish community from getting involved in this cause or that cause, and that's where it gets really scary and where we're seeing more and more of it. Again, there's been a couple incidents in the LGBTQ community, and we're really seeing it right now on college campuses.
So give us an example of what experience is like, or what you hear from college campuses, from Jewish college students. What kind of confrontations are they experiencing, or How are they feeling these effects of the BDS movement, people who are trying to push a certain agenda against Israel and targeting them? Can you share one story with us?
Sure. I think that I don't want to share anybody's particular story, but in fact, we just had our global forum a few weeks ago in D.C., and we had a couple days that were focusing on students and their experiences on college campuses. And in fact, I participated in that, as did Lori from Wider Bridge, talking about this concept of intersectionality and what's happening on college campuses. And I heard many stories where students who identify as pro-Israel but also care about other minority rights or care about other things that would be considered progressive issues were actually told that they can't participate, they're not welcome, if they also support the state of Israel. And then on the flip side, and again where this really turns into anti-Semitism, is that there were Jewish students that just feel more akin to, more aligned with progressive issues and wanted to focus on those, and were told because they were Jewish they weren't welcome.
It's really, I mean, you know, I read about this all the time, and doing the newscast, of course, we mention BDS efforts all the time, but it's still, I'm still taken aback by those stories and just so disturbed as to, you know, the rise of these incidents over the last few years. And what do you say to a college student? You know, they're 18, 19, 20 years old, they've just left home for the first time, they're kind of making it on their own and trying to make friends and trying to find their path. What do you say to sort of give them those tools to answer people who are trying to, who are basically targeting them for being Jewish?
I'm really glad you asked, and even though it's a little off topic from what happened this past weekend, AJC actually started a new program called Leaders for Tomorrow, where we're taking high school students who show an interest in being advocates on college campuses and basically giving them the lay of the land and giving them the tools and encouraging their leadership skills on these issues so that they are armed with the facts and they do understand what's happening in Israel. And some of them, you know, they're all over the political spectrum, but they care about Israel. They understand that Israel is tied to their Jewish identity, and they're having the tools to go and make those arguments or follow what's going on in certain student governments if there's a push to pass a divestment resolution. So we're educating them before they even get to college campuses. And then once they're there, again, AJC is here as a resource and also to help show that they do have a community behind them that supports them, that's ready to give them information, and that the more you understand about Israel, the more you understand about your Judaism, the more pride you can have in it, and the stronger case you have for a Jewish state of Israel. And I think that's just so important, that this isn't about one particular topic. There are so many people, including Lori, that want to see an independent Palestinian state, that want to see a two-state solution. But when you get down to it, so much of what they're confronting is not about that. It's about ending Israel altogether as an independent state of the Jewish people. And I think the more people understand what's underlying it, and the more people are armed with the history and the facts about Israel, the better prepared they are to have these discussions and confront it when they see it on college campuses.
Absolutely, Amy, and I think that's just wonderful that that the program is really for high school students, as you said, so that by the time they get to college, they have facts, they have information, they can have a discussion. And I really applaud the AJC for all of their efforts. I know, as you mentioned, you just had your global forum and you deal with a lot of challenges that the Jewish world faces, so we thank you for your efforts day to day and for taking the time to speak with us today. And Amy, please, reach out to us again about the story of what happened in Chicago, and we hope that there is an apology issued by the Dyke March. Hopefully something positive will come out of this incident.
Thank you so much. I hope we have better news for you soon, and it was a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you. Amy Stoken is director of the American Jewish Committee's Chicago office, and we appreciate her time and for joining us today on JBS. Thank you, as always, to our director, Sloan Copeland, and production coordinator, Serge Goldberg, JBS Associate Director, Dara Golub, and to our editors, Dennis Golan and John McDevitt. I'm Teisha Bader in for Mark Golub on this edition of In the News.